Hello, welcome. Thank you for looking in again to this, the second in our midweek reflections for Lent from St. Paul's in Glencare. Recently I read a book called The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks, who grew up on the family farm in the Lake District. At the age of 20, he left for Australia, where the vast scale of farming both impressed and depressed him. He was homesick for the crooked fields, ancient hedges, and dry stone walls of home. He had always revered the traditions his grandfather had taught him. But now his grandfather was dead, and his father deep in debt. Small farms like theirs, scraping by with a mix of crops and livestock, they were told belonged to the past. Unless he could persuade his father to modernise, they were doomed. For a time on his return they tried. They switched to more efficient breeds of sheep. They stopped growing turnips and barley, sprayed pesticide to clear their pastures of thistles, and no longer laid hedges by hand. The bigger farms in the area, with their factory-like sheds and large herds of engineered cattle, were already ahead of the game. The exception was a neighbour called Henry, so old-fashioned that he still spread his fields with muck from cattle yards rather than using artificial fertiliser or slurry. Poor Henry was considered a joke in the community, until the soil from his fields was sent to an analyst and found to be richer than the intensely farmed land around it. The most traditional farmer in the district had the healthiest soil. For Rebanks, this was an epiphany. To earlier generations of farmers, he writes, the idea that nature is vulnerable would have seemed like a hippie or communist propaganda. But to Rebanks, it made urgent sense, and he resolved to farm in a more sustainable way. He acknowledges that beauty does not pay the bills, but he is determined to try and find the balance between having to make a living with a sense of duty towards future generations. He has put environmental ideals into practice by planting 12,000 trees, by rerouting the river across his land to create wetland areas, by dispensing with pesticides and sacrificing arable land to encourage wildlife. He's not saying that every farm should be like this, but many farmers would benefit, and it is estimated there are 1 billion of them around the globe by following his example. The rest of us would benefit too. He maintains that becoming slaves to consumerism and strangers to the fields that feed us makes us part of the problem. The irony is, he has now gone back to farming using the same methods as his grandfather. The latest David Attenborough wildlife series, A Perfect Planet, was shown on television recently. In typically stunning fashion, it demonstrated how diverse forces and elements, such as the heat of the sun, our weather systems, volcanoes, and ocean currents, work together to keep our planet in perfect balance. The last programme in the series, however, focused on another force, humans. And it was very hard to watch, because we are the ones upsetting that perfect balance as our actions and behaviours cause irreversible damage to the wonderful place we call home. In the film Titanic, the chief engineer comes to see the captain at a very smart table and tells him that the ship has hit an iceberg and the damage is not repairable and that they're going to sink in a fairly short time. The idea is so far-fetched that the people at the table simply laugh and carry on as if nothing had happened. Is that too dramatic a way of representing our current attitude to what is happening to our planet because of climate change and environmental damage? Many scientists and activists have been telling us for some time now about the urgency of the situation. Young people in particular seem to have got the message, more so than their elders. Unfortunately, it is their elders who are in charge of the ship. The world's resources are finite, yet our demand on them continues to grow, so something has to give. Only the richest and most powerful will survive the rising temperatures, rising sea levels, rising prices, famine, mass migration, radicalised politics, water wars, and more will assault the poorest countries first. We tend to forget that everything is connected to everything else on our planet. When humans interfere with any part of the natural order, it's going to upset another part of it. As Christians, how are we to respond to this? In the book Genesis, the goodness of creation is emphasized multiple times. The natural world is wonderful in the sight of God and is to be respected and enjoyed by humankind. We have sometimes gotten ourselves into trouble over the phrase, have dominion, as if that gives us license to selflessly plunder this glorious creation. In fact, the use of the word dominion here is telling all men and women to be like God and to love and care for the land as God does. Thus, the command is not exploitative, but protective. Humanity and the rest of creation are part of the same fabric, and attitudes of men and women needs to be one of humility and respect towards our common home. We're called to be stewards, doing everything we can to care for and to encourage the flourishing of all life on this planet. Our relationship with the earth could also be described as sacramental, the natural world being an outward and visible sign of the presence and goodness of God. Such descriptions speak of the interdependence of humans and the rest of creation. We've no right to exploit and every responsibility to care. We humans need to be honest with ourselves. Something deep within our souls needs to change if we are to overcome our innate tendency to short-termism and self-interest. Many of us are trying to change our ways, even if it has taken government legislation or EU directives to almost force us into amending our habits. We do sort our waste these days. We do try to ensure as much as possible can be recycled. We buy goods without unnecessary plastic packaging. If we can afford it, we change to hybrid or electric vehicles. We cycle or walk more instead of jumping into the car for unnecessary journeys. We turn off the lights when not in use at home. We no longer boil and reboil the kettle unnecessarily. We do not leave appliances on standby. All these small things can help reduce our domestic carbon footprint. For too long now, we've been part of a throwaway culture in which little or nothing seems to get repaired anymore. Surely that could change. I heard the term reverent consumption for the first time recently. Basically, do we ask ourselves often enough, do we really need this? Going forward, everything we do must be done in a spirit of loving enjoyment of the natural world and a sense of wonder at the astonishing diversity of creation. As Christians, we have a duty to ensure that diversity is not diminished so that it can be enjoyed by the generations coming after us. I leave you with two questions to reflect on. In the last 5 years, how much have you changed your lifestyle and habits in response to all the new information we have been getting about climate change and environmental damage? And in light of all the warnings we continue to receive, do you think you are doing enough?